can't see me, you Stevie. Wondering how I reach more evolutions than Eevee and make it look easy.
What is up, Earth's mightiest subscribers? It's Blerd without fear. Welcome back to the channel. All right, pardon the mess behind me. I'm actually reorganizing the Quoted Fingers Blerd cave. So if you see any stuff just laying around, I hope it's not there by next week. That said, today's video, we're going to be talking about Sabertooth and the Exiles, number 5 by Victor LaValle and Leonard Kirk. This issue has a lot going on in it, and it may not seem like it at first to the uninitiated, but I really love what is all being set up here, and like the little subtle commentaries, and even in some cases not so subtle commentaries that Victor LaValle is just known for throwing in his stories. I often say that if you are someone who is not as familiar with Victor LaValle's work, I actually highly recommend his Boom Studios comic series Eve. Very great story, and is actually how I initially became aware of Victor LaValle. So yeah, if you really want to see Victor LaValle like really leaning into some commentary, go check out that story arc from Boom Studios. It's fantastic. I think that it's ultimately up to 10, I believe, issues now. I could be wrong about that, but it's 2 separate Eve series, but one continues from the other. But yeah, either way, point of the matter is that in this series, in the final issue of Sabertooth and the Exiles, Victor LaValle is setting up a lot of amazing things. And if you're wondering whether or not any of this is going to carry any weight going forward, I think it's honestly safe to say that it will. I think this gravy train is just going to keep on trucking. Now, when last we left off, Victor LaValle had put Sabertooth in a very precarious position. We know that, from the start of this particular series, Sabertooth has become a victim of Dr. Barrington's Barrington Coil, a device that completely nullifies Sabertooth's healing factor to the point that he was not able to heal from even the most simplistic of injuries that he has had up until recently, and more specifically was making it to where his body was shutting down and he was finding it difficult to walk. Popping his claws was a struggle. Even just standing up out of a chair was a struggle for him. And then he learned that the person who had put Dr. Barrington up to this was his own son, Graydon Creed, who we talked about in the previous video. I'm not going to rehash anything here. A lot of what I actually talked about regarding Graydon Creed in my previous video for Sabertooth and the Exiles number 4 is actually brought up in this issue. So you go check out that video up there and you can go learn more about that. But the whole idea here is that Graydon Creed has been trying to kill every iteration of his father, Sabertooth, from across the multiverse. He has killed hundreds of different versions of Victor Creed, and it was largely believed that this version of Victor Creed, or Earth 616 version, was the last one. And as it turns out, that's not actually true. He has actually killed all but 4 of the Victor Creeds from across the multiverse, the Earth 616 Victor Creed included. We see this as Sabertooth is fighting back against his son Graydon, that a trio of mutants comes to Sabertooth's rescue, only it's not Sabertooth's Exiles, as he initially thought. He thought that this team of Exiles is the very same mutants that he had paired up with during the initial Sabertooth miniseries, characters like Third Eye, Oya, Necra, and Melter, Madison Jeffries. He thought all of them were coming to save him, despite the fact that he had basically lied to them, that he had manipulated them and used them, set them up as patsies to take the fall while he escaped Krakoa, and then only to re-encounter them later and not really be on particularly good footing with them. Much to Sabertooth's surprise, it's not his Exiles, and it's not Mole and the Morlocks from Krakoa either. It's actually just a trio of more Sabertooths. We see a version of Sabertooth from Earth 203, who is apparently the Sentinel of Rough Justice, as he is referred to here in this issue. He is basically from a universe where Victor Creed became Captain America. We also see a version of Sabertooth from Earth 12 called the baddest of the bad boy celebrities. He kind of comes off as, well, yes, one of those typical, stereotypical Hollywood socialites, people that are probably influencers and just super duper wealthy, rich, and probably have more money than they'll ever know what to do with, but also at the same time kind of giving off some metrosexual vibes that, yeah, I don't know. Hard to say. He's a tough nut to crack. We also see another version of Sabertooth, a female version from Earth 1912, and is more of a prehistoric savage land looking version of Sabertooth. Each of these versions of Sabertooth had extracted the Barrington coil from one another, and the three of them survived, while the rest of the Sabertooths met untimely ends. They ultimately save Sabertooth from Graydon Creed, and while yes, they do rip the Barrington coil out of our version of Sabertooth, they don't do it because they wanted to work with him. They actually think he's the weakest of them, but for whatever reason, they go ahead and do it anyway, and I will go ahead and tell you right now, it does ultimately lead to Sabertooth probably finding the most reliable team he ever could have found. Because not only is he now paired up with these versions of Sabertooth from across the multiverse, he's working along with them. They see his strength now that he was able to recover from having the Barrington coil literally gutted out of him. Like, they didn't like do a little small cut and take it out of him. They literally ripped his entire upper torso open and then snatched it out. So basically, if his healing factor didn't kick in when it did, he just would have died. Now, another thing that they've been able to accomplish is that Sabertooth has been able to send Graydon Creed hurtling into the multiverse. There's a device inside Graydon's spaceship that is seemingly how all the other Sabertooths were brought from their various, portions of the multiverse. Sabertooth is able to use that device to send Graydon hurtling into the unknown. We know he's not dead. He even does the typical supervillain thing as he's being sent into the abyss of the multiverse, that he'll find a way to get back. But just the same, Sabertooth has won. He's defeated his son without having to kill him, and he has a new family, not just these three other Sabertooths, but also the other Sabertooths that Graydon Creed had killed. Now, I say this because, as you've noticed in some of the panels I've been showing, you've probably seen some headless bodies that look eerily like Sabertooth, and that's by design, because all of those heads that Graydon Creed had mounted on the wall in the previous issue of Sabertooth and the Exiles #4, those heads were taken off for a reason. He kept the actual bodies of the Sabertooths. Now, I find a lot of this pretty interesting, and I think it's actually very appropriate that a character like Graydon Creed, he has a room inside of his spaceship labeled Herbert West. I don't expect a lot of people to be familiar with that name. It's actually a name of a character from one of H.P. Lovecraft's short stories called Herbert West, Reanimator. Now, some of you may be more familiar with the Reanimator movie, which was a film that came out in 1985 and is, roughly an adaptation of that H.P. Lovecraft story. But the long and short of it is that Herbert West was a med student who discovered how to reanimate corpses, and you could just take that from there. But it's not the only H.P. Lovecraft connection that Graydon Creed makes in this issue. He actually takes a direct quote from, I believe it's The Nameless City, and also this is something that comes up in Call of Cthulhu, but there's a quote that reads, "That is not dead which can eternal lie, and with strange eons, even death may die." This is all not only reference to H.P. Lovecraft himself, as well as his stories, but also in reference to what he's done with these Sabertooths. He has reanimated these bodies using devices that are directly connected to his battle armor that allow him to control them and treat them as an army of Sabertooths without any actual autonomy of their own. All of them answer to Graydon Creed. They do his absolute bidding. But with him being sent hurtling into the multiverse, Sabertooth is able to take this army of himself and turn it into his own personal weapon, one that he seems more than likely getting ready to turn against Krakoa. He even brings up that he has a friend with a birthday coming up, and last he heard, he's been hanging out on Krakoa and that he wants to go and raise some hell. Now, this could be in reference to multiple things. We do know back in the past, he used to visit Wolverine on a regular basis on his birthday and terrorize him. It could be anybody else for that matter as well, but I feel like Wolverine's like the lowest hanging of fruit. I always talk about with Victor LaValle how he's always taking an opportunity to teach about little and lesser known parts of history that people just don't talk about. And it's here where they use the term Maroons. Now, this is something I've actually talked about in the past in a previous video for Black Panther about a couple of years back. But basically, what he's referring to here was the community of African slaves who had escaped from slavery and it created their own community. Now, in the instance of Black Panther, they used the Maroons as a name for the rebellion against the intergalactic empire of Wakanda that was being run by Jadaka, who was basically like a proto-Killmonger from, you know, a faraway galaxy. It's here where Mole is talking about this and how he learned about a lot of this stuff from Necra and how originally they wanted to retake the name of the Morlocks. They actually decided instead to refer to themselves as the Maroons. Getting away from what I feel is kind of the problematic nature of the name Morlocks, considering that it was one of those things where Morlocks, they were considered to be like these ugly, monstrous individuals. And while technically the Morlocks do have a tendency to look hideous sometimes, or at the very least, off-putting, I do feel like Maroons might actually be a somewhat better term to use to describe them, especially when you consider the fact that these are mutants who aren't necessarily just Morlocks, but just mutants in general. The reason why they're calling themselves the Maroons is because they are cutting themselves away from Krakoa. These are mutants who have, for all intents and purposes, exiled themselves, and more specifically, these are also the same characters we have been following: Oya, Necra, Madison Jeffries, Melter, Third Eye. All of these characters have pretty much distanced themselves from Krakoa because they themselves were exiled from Krakoa. So they're not going back. They are just going to create their own community and build up from there. And because of some of the things going on with the Morlocks on Krakoa, most of them don't even live on Krakoa anyway, but some of the mutants that do live on Krakoa that felt like they were being left out in the cold, they have walked away as well. But it's also brought up here that one of the reasons why this also came up is because of something called the Sabretooth War. Very likely in reference to the things that we literally just talked about. Mole describes the Sabretooth War as the greatest threat to Krakoa and mutant kind as a whole, says that they were even more dangerous to their livelihood than Xavier or Orcus could have ever hoped to have been. So yeah, Sabretooth is bringing war to Krakoa and maybe even all of mutant kind, and maybe even just the world as a whole. I don't know, I feel like Sabretooth is one of those guys, he doesn't really fight for one specific ideal in terms of like singling out an exact single group. I feel like, yeah, he's just gonna wage war across everything using his army of Sabertooths, which is an insane thing to think about. Now, you probably noticed when I talked about the Exiles, I didn't bring up characters like Nanny or Orphan Maker, and that's because they're not around anymore. Over the course of this, we saw that Dr. Barrington had been experimenting on not just teenage and young adult mutants, but also on infant mutants as well, and their X genes are active and they're unleashing this wave of psionic energy that would kill anyone that came near them. Now, in this instance, Nanny uses her powers on the Exiles to regress them. It's a power we don't really see Nanny use terribly often, but this is something she has the capacity to do, to regress someone to a more childlike mentality. And while the Exiles willingly allow her to do this so they can get close enough to the children to calm them down and stop them from unleashing these psionic waves, Nanny uses this opportunity to not just shut them down, but to also take these 6 children under her care, 6 children who are some of the most powerful mutant babies in existence right now, and we don't really know what she's going to do with that, but I think by the time we see Nanny again, let's just say she'll have 6 more Orphan Makers alongside her. Once again, we don't really know exactly where it's going to go from there, but that is a very likely possibility. Now, as far as what is going to happen with the Exiles, I don't really know where they're going to go from there, other than the fact that they are using Madison Jeffries as a ship to travel somewhere to find safety, as Mole does imply they eventually do. However, I do want to point out, Necra still has the Krakoan Death Seed. Even though right now Sabretooth is a whole problem for Krakoa right now, they still have a way to easily kill him, or at the very least, punish him. We don't really know exactly what the Death Seed actually does. When Cypher gave Necra the seed, when she mentioned whether or not it would kill him, Cypher explicitly stated it won't kill him. It'll just make him wish that he was killed. So once again, just because it's called a death seed doesn't actually mean it will actually do that. The death can mean a lot of different things, but I think it definitely will mean a change. And as I said in my original video for Sabertooth Volume 4, Number 5, I think that it will very likely just make him no longer a mutant. I've even kind of wondered whether or not it would actually be something similar to what happened to him during Axis. Maybe it might flip his personality, bring back the Axis version of Sabertooth, which I actually really liked. But anyways, that's everything I really want to talk about with Sabertooth and the Exiles #5. If you enjoyed this video, do the YouTube thing, like, share, comment, subscribe, and make sure to tap that notification bell so you don't miss out on any of the videos that I put out. Until next time, let me know what you thought about Sabertooth and the Exiles #5 and the series as a whole. Keep it plus ultra and sound off in the comments.